So thank you for being our special guest for the Jill Dando News Centre series of interviews.
You're very welcome. No, thanks for the invites. Yeah, looking
brilliant.
forward to it. Although a little bit nervous.
Well, you're on the other side this time, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's usually me doing the questions.
Just to do a few introductions here, we've got students from across the trust from 3 of our secondary schools. So from the King Alfred School down in Highbridge, 2 schools in Weston, we've got Whirl and Priory students, as well as coordinators from the centres as well. We've actually got 4 of our students that are going to be hosts today and leading the interview. So I'm going to hand over straight away to Shannon, who's going to start us off with the first questions. Shannon, over to you, please.
Okay. So my question is, who is the most inspirational person you've interviewed and why?
Wow, gosh, that's a big question. It's a good question. Do you know? It's probably an instant name doesn't come to mind, but it's possibly some people that none of us have ever heard of before, or if you get my drift, will not hear from again. Sometimes it's people that you just meet in the day to day, rather than a prime minister. I know some of you or your contemporaries have interviewed prime ministers. So I've done that once. David Cameron, he wasn't the most inspirational person. I've interviewed army personnel, politicians, musicians, sports stars. Tried to interview David Beckham quite recently, but he didn't seem to want to be interviewed. So it's probably not the answer you're probably thinking of or wanting, but it's sometimes people who are prepared to talk to us, sometimes under the most difficult circumstances. If we are asking them for an interview when they're going through a particularly difficult time for whatever reason, I'm always amazed that some people say yes, because I always think of myself, would I say yes if someone was asking me? And I would probably say no, but I'm surprised because some people want to pay tribute to someone. We were talking about that terrible story in Avonmouth last week, and I've been not approaching the families because they've asked for privacy, but we've asked the chief executive of Wessex Water, for example, who own the plant, to talk, and he's declined at the moment. But I think they will in time want to pay tribute to the colleagues that they lost, and sometimes it's family members who want to say how great their relative was and what they did, that sort of thing. That's where I get inspiration from. I think it's from people that you probably just pass in the street every day yourselves, or you may do at school, and you might not know their story, but when you do get the chance to sit down and talk to them, you do think, wow, they really are inspiring people. I don't know if that's, maybe I'll come up with a name as I think about it later on, but yeah, there's lots of people I admire. I've interviewed, from different parties, political parties, sports stars, as I say, or musicians, and some really great people. One great person who comes to mind was a chap who, I don't know if you heard of the guy who ran all those marathons. He lives in Portishead, and he ran 401 marathons. Ben Smith, I think his name is. I forget. It's Ben. But, I interviewed him. Really nice guy. A sad backstory, but he's really turned his life around and did some great work. And he's an inspirational guy. Someone like him, I would say, who, people may have heard of, but they're not the big A-list celebrities that some people might think. I don't know if that's any help.
It's like everyday people are more inspirational, like the people with big celebrities. Makes sense.
Yeah. And sometimes, you kind of do meet these people and you get a bit nervous thinking, oh gosh, they're going to be, very good at answering questions, and they're going to know every trick about how to avoid answers. And they're actually sometimes more disappointing than when you don't know people and they give such great answers. I'm sure in your stories that you gather, that you find people that you think, wow, I never expected them to say that, or I didn't know that about them. And that's sometimes more rewarding in a way.
I'll hand over to Tamsin to ask her question now.
Okay.
Hi, my question is, what's the most interesting story you've covered in the Southwest?
Oh, right, in the Southwest. Elections are always good. I mean, they're not perhaps that's not a very good example, general elections. I do like politics. So that's always an interesting time, but I appreciate that's a national story. But of course, it's as relevant for us here as anywhere. So that's always interesting. It's the same with COVID stories at the moment. A global story, but of just as much interest in the Southwest. I mean, I'd covered the many years ago now. For me, I mean, I don't know how many of you know, but I'm from Weston. I was born and bred in Weston, and my first job was on the Western Mercury. So I've been where you guys are in some ways. I went to that wonderful school, Broad Oak, down the road, which has since been demolished and rebuilt. So that shows you how old I am. I came back to Weston to do the story of the fire, the pier fire. So that's, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, 10 years ago now, perhaps even a little longer. And that was, traumatic, but it was a big story for me, and it meant a lot to me, and I wanted to get it right. And I think when you go to a place where you may know the person, or you know the story or the place, you really want to do it justice. And although that was a sad story, there was a happy ending, you could say, with the rebuild of it. We've done so many stories on the old pier around the corner, which still needs its fix. But the Grand Pier was turned around very quickly, and that was a story that I'll never forget.
Were you there, Nigel?
Yes, I was there. I mean, I think I probably got there a little earlier than Richard. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning, and the pier was well ablaze. And I've told this story before, but I remember hurtling down the M5 from Bristol in the radio car, and all you could see is just before you come off the motorway, you look to your right and you'd see Wellbury Hill. And it was a glorious summer day, brilliant blue sky. And all you could see coming up over the hill was this massive plume of black smoke. You couldn't see the pier from there, but it was just remarkable. You knew what was going to happen. And I do remember coming off the motorway, driving down Locking Road to get to the seafront. And there were hundreds of people who, some of them to me, seemed as though they were almost walking in a trance, zombie-like, towards the seafront, because they knew what they were going to see. And certainly when you got to the seafront and you could see these 4 pillars burning, and the source of this huge pall of black smoke that was billowing over the Bristol Channel by then, it was certainly a sight that I'll never forget.
That was an incredible story. I'll move over to our next host, Finn.
Hello,
Hi,
my name
Finn.
is Finlay. Hello. I'm going to go to Olivia first, as her question is really interesting. So if you would like to do your question.
Thanks. My question is, what was the main thing that you want to achieve as a journalist?
I suppose that it sounds a bit cliche, but it's the same then as it is now, I suppose, and that's just to get to the story and to tell the truth of the story. I hope ITV as a public service broadcaster, as Nigel will know with the BBC, hopefully people turn to us when they want to know the story as it is, impartial, accurate, trustworthy. And I think that's some of the measures by which we're judged. And if we don't get it right, people tell us very quickly. But I think they can see that genuinely, especially in regional news, that you're there and you're the eyes and ears for that viewer, and that you need to be honest and to be impartial, but also to be accurate as well as quick and meet deadlines and everything else. But I think that's always been one of the main goals for me is just to be accurate with what you're saying. Get to the story and tell it as the viewer would want to see it. I think don't get sidetracked too much, or make sure you're true to what the person is telling you. You don't misinterpret their quotes, or give a wrong impression of the story that they are telling you. And yeah, of course, you know, we're all human. We get it wrong, and we get complaints sometimes. You know,
In your opinion, do you think the news is quite accurate, or what's your views on that? Because a lot of people, you know, you get a lot of people saying that they don't think the stories have been said correctly, but from a journalist, and you actually hear a lot of the things, would you say that it's normally accurate, or is it quite strayed a lot of the time?
yeah, there's a huge variety. I think, I mean, who am I to know what other people have discovered and maybe accurate as well? I think social media can be quite dangerous. I mean, I don't want to sound like Trump and talk about fake news, but you know, you can get a lot of rumor and inaccuracies, and people do throw a lot of things out there without obviously checking them first, which is, you know, if they are a member of the public and they think they know something, you know, it's within their right to say it, but they have to be aware that by putting it on a public platform, they are putting it out there, and they have to be accurate with it. You know, we've had court cases in the past where people have put out stories and been, you know, and have defamed someone for what they've said, and slandered someone in some way, and they've gone to court for it. So I don't think people, when they do post stuff, often think, would I be happy if this appeared on the front page of my newspaper tomorrow morning, or the main headline on my news tonight? People think, oh, this is fine, I can just throw this comment away, don't really need to check it, I don't care if it's biased. Whereas we can't, of course, do that. And I know in what you guys do, you don't do that. You would get two sources to a story, you double check it and make sure it's fair and accurate and balanced. And do you hear from both sides of the story, which is often something that we have to do with local councils or the police or anyone, you know, who might not want to talk to us, but we've heard a story from a member of the public or a source, and we have to go to them to say, do you want to comment on this? And we give them the right of reply, as it's called. So I think there's so many streams of media now. We live in a 24-hour news world, don't we? A lot of it is good, very, very good, from those who are professional journalists and do it for a living and have got experience. But I think you have to tread very carefully. If you just see something on Twitter and you think, well, that's a great story and it must be true, so let's just go and repeat it. I think you have to be really careful. So it's more difficult these days, I think, than when I started out, and there's no such thing as Twitter or even Facebook.
I'm gonna ask my question now. Basically, what my question is: out of every story you've ever reported on, which has been your least favorite, and what has caused it to be like?
Wow, gosh, I thought you were going to say my favorite, but no, you threw me with the least favorite. Gosh, I think we once went to a school. I mean, it's not my least favorite. I mean, I've spent many a time sat in court for days and days, and that's been you know, not as profitable or good use of time as I think I could have spent. We do less court reporting now just because the resources, particularly at ITV and in regional news, aren't so great that you can sit in court for days on end, or council meetings and things like that, which are no great excitement. But I went to a school, and we were invited into a school, and I'm trying to think, it was a few years ago, it was in Bristol, and the head teacher invited us in to talk about a subject of, that's right, her school wasn't doing so well. We were doing a story on school league tables, and this school had come out quite badly, and Bristol's education at the time was one of the worst educational systems, so to say, in the country. It's much better now, thankfully, but on the government judgments, it was deemed to be very poor, and this school was one of the poorest in one of the poorest authorities. So we asked them for an interview, and they actually said, yes, we want to invite you in because we want to tell you how it is, and how actually we're doing great things. And yes, we're not very good at maths, or we've got some very poor science scores recently, but this is what we're doing to improve it. So we spoke to staff and pupils, and the head teacher was with us all the way. She wouldn't obviously leave us to it, understandably. She was on us all the time. and she personally selected the pupils to speak to, and she obviously put up some very articulate, very intelligent students who told me what they thought of the school. And not all of it was very complimentary, because of course they know that their school wasn't doing very well, and they said, well, we're not very good at this and we don't really like doing that. And the head teachers heard all this, and we tried to balance it, and she gave her opinion, and we pulled together a report that had all of this element in it. You know, here's a school not doing very well, but the head teacher tells me things are much better. And you know, that is an old historic interpretation of her school. And then she complained afterwards, saying it was terrible, and you know, you shouldn't have done it that way, even though everything we'd said she'd heard, and she knew the take we were doing. So I think it was fair, balanced, accurate. And she actually took us to Ofcom, which is the regulator. You may know that Ofcom sort of oversees, an independent regulator that oversees you know, TV, radio, amongst other things. And she said, "Oh, this is terrible. I want ITV investigated." And Ofcom looked at it, and they said, "Well, what's your complaint?" "Well, it wasn't accurate, whatever." Anyway, it went on for months and months. I just had to give an account of how I saw the story, and they found in my favour, or they said, "No, ITV have done nothing wrong here, and it's a fair, accurate report." So it was a difficult time, and you know, you had a few worries, thinking, was I accurate? Did I misinterpret anything? But no, it was fine, and I've never heard from her again, and she's never apologised. I mean, you know, for putting us through it. But that was possibly one of the hardest times, I suppose. You know, if that's so, you have to be very careful. You have to make sure. Well, I suppose what I'm trying to say is, you know, whatever you publish, or print or write, and put on your news sites, just be very accurate. Be sure that if someone challenged you the next day and said, "Oh, you didn't quote me correctly," say, "Oh, yes, I did, because here's your quote in my notebook," or "Here you are on tape." Just be sure that it can't be challenged for you to think, "Oh yeah, I got that completely wrong," or you know, just make sure names are right, and the quotes are right, and the story's balanced, and you've given everyone the chance to have their say. I think, you know, don't be shy of telling a story that it's not going to reflect well on a certain subject, but make sure your facts are spot on, and you can back your story up the next day or the next week. If someone comes back and says, "Oh, I don't like this," they might not like it, but they can't say it's wrong.
We're now going to go on to the next person. We have Ari.
Hi, my question for you is, which football team do you support, and is it different to the ones you've had to report on?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, my first football love was Liverpool, just when I was a young lad, and they were winning everything at the time. And I remember watching them in the FA Cup when they won the FA Cup, and I thought, yeah, this is a great team. So I've always had a soft spot for them, and I've been lucky enough to see them a couple of times. But locally, the team that I support is Bristol City. I don't know if I've offended half of you there or not, and it was a team that before I went into TV, I was on a paper with Nigel on the Bristol Evening Post. And it was my first job after the Western Mercury, and I was given a job on the sports desk. And I managed to end up, first of all, reporting on Bristol Rovers, and then I crossed the divide, as no one should apparently ever do, and started reporting on Bristol City. And I had some really good times with them, as I did with Rovers. I like both clubs. I might be one of those few people who actually want both Bristol clubs to do well. But I spent more time with Bristol City, got to know quite a lot of the players and the manager and chairman and owners and the rest of it, and travelled around with them to quite a few exciting places and all around England, really, not abroad too much, although I did go abroad to report on football with England. In the European Championships and the World Cup in France many years ago now. But Bristol City, yeah, I had a soft spot for, and I always look for their scores every time they're playing, and I always want them to do well. And one day, hopefully, they'll be up in the Premier League, maybe this season, maybe not, but it would be great to just to report on that kind of success. I think would be brilliant for the city and for the area, because it would just increase the crowd numbers and the money and the players they get and the exposure they get on national and international TV, I think would be amazing for the area. It'd be great to be able to report that story. So fingers crossed.
So Richard, based on what you've told us so far, do you have any tips for people like us who enjoy journalism and hopefully go on to do something like what you do now?
Yeah, definitely. I was not as advanced as what you're doing now, but I was in a similar position to you when I was your age, and I was, as I say, at Broadoak, and I remember the head teacher standing up in an assembly one morning and saying, we need some volunteers because the local paper is going to start a schools page, and every month they're going to have different schools featured, and they want pupils to write stories about their school or anything that's interesting to them. And I put my hand up and put my name down, and I just wrote anything and everything I could think of as a 14-year-old schoolboy. And I remember thinking, well, I'm not much good at most things at school, but I'm pretty good at English. And I thought at the time, I remember thinking, yeah, journalism could be something I could do, because I might just be able to scrape 5 O-levels as they were at the time. And I started writing for the Western Mercury through the paper, through school. So I just did stories on anything that would happen. And I'm sure, well, I know you guys do far more exciting stories than I ever did. I used to write about new science blocks or sports teams doing well or something. But you guys, I know, do incredible stories, interviewing very high-powered people, and you get some great guests to talk to, and you've got a great operation there. So you must have fantastic stories coming out of your ears, really. So that's what I did. And then I was lucky enough at the time, I don't know what opportunities exist now, but when I got a little bit older, I started going into the local newspaper in my own time in holidays, just to be around, really, just to listen and look and do any kind of jobs that they wanted me to do. I don't know if these things exist anymore. It's a shame if they don't, but I was very lucky that I was able to sit around the newsroom in the local newspaper and just get to know people and get my foot in the door. And my advice to you guys would be to seize absolutely any opportunity that ever comes your way. And if they don't come your way, make them come your way. Go out and get the opportunity, if you know what I mean. Be a nuisance to people. If you say, I'm desperate to be a radio reporter, that would be something I would love to do. I joined hospital radio, I don't even know if they exist anymore, but I went to Western Hospital and I just did things there. It's all free. Obviously, you've got to give your own time. But if you're passionate about it, and the more you learn, the more people will see that and think, yeah, we could have that guy around a bit more. That girl knows quite a few people, actually, or she knows this subject really well, or she's really keen, or she's very enthusiastic, very determined. I think, don't be put off by anyone saying no. Just ignore that. If you've got your foot in the door, never take it out. Just be a nuisance. And in the end, I just think the editor at the time said, okay, yeah, we'll give you 6 months, come along, see what you can do. And in those 6 months, I had some ups and quite a few downs. And they used to say, well, I don't really think this is going to work out. Maybe, this isn't for you, or maybe you should try something else. But by the skin of my teeth, I survived. And I think that's the thing. You've got to have determination, and it almost can't be, you can't fake that. You've got to be genuinely interested and passionate and determined, and never give up. So what you're doing now, you guys are ahead of many, many others. I mean, we get people who ask for work experience. Unfortunately, for some reason, we aren't able to take people on work experience until they're about 18. So it's after their A-levels, which seems quite unfair. But people come into our newsroom, have a little look round for a day, meet people, see how we operate. And that's something I was going to say at the end, but we would happily extend to you guys when we get back out of COVID times. At the moment, I'm not in our newsroom very often at all, so we don't accept guests at the moment. But just so you can see what goes on, and then you've got an understanding, and when you do get the chance to perhaps take media further in your A levels or in any kind of further education, you get a sense of what you want and where you're going with that, and you have a goal and a target. It's good to experience all things: print, radio, TV, anything and everything. I mean, obviously social media now, there's so many more opportunities, but it's very, very competitive. It was at the time, and I just think it's got more competitive now. So I do feel for you that you're up against a lot of people, but I've never seen an operation like this. I was amazed when I saw the news centre that you've got there. I've never seen that. I've seen other in universities, they've got fantastic studios and radio setups and all the rest of it. But for a secondary school, you guys are so lucky to have what you do, and I would absolutely make every opportunity from it. Just take any chance and make it happen, and have an idea and pursue it, and never let up on it until you reach what you want to do.
I'm going to pass on to our next host now. We have Samara.
Hi, Richard. So my first question to you is, what does a typical day as a correspondent look like?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, you probably expect me to say there's no typical day at the moment, especially because you might have an idea what you're going to be doing when you get up and join the meeting. We have a meeting on Google Hangout at 9 o'clock every day, and we think about what we're going to make in the 6 o'clock program. And some things are already there, and we might know about a certain number of stories. Perhaps half of the stories we've got a good idea are going to be making news that day, but not always at all. I mean, I might think, okay, today I'm going to be editing something I've already filmed, or I'm going to be doing this story, but it's not going out tonight. And then suddenly something like Avonmouth happens. Like last Thursday, I was sat at this very seat and I was editing away on something, and the news desk called and said, there's something happening in Avonmouth. We're not quite sure what yet, but as you're not assigned to a story today, can you go just have a look? We're going to get a camera there, be as quick as you can. And, we know what it became. So certainly didn't expect to be doing that day. But we all start, most of us start at a 9 o'clock point, working towards a 6 o'clock show. We might have filmed something the night before. We might have been out before that meeting. We might sometimes be out very early and out very late. So there's no typical day, and there's certainly no typical hour of the day. You don't definitely finish at a particular time. But the great thing about this job is that I don't see it as work. I don't think, right, I've got to get up and do this and finish it as quickly as possible and get home, or do something else. So it becomes something that you just want to do, and it doesn't really matter if it's a Saturday morning or a Friday night. We often go out with police or something on a patrol on a Friday night, and you don't think, oh, Friday night, I'd much rather be watching TV. You just think this is going to be a great story that's going to make a piece, hopefully, of interest to a lot of people, maybe even next week. Sometimes we shoot stuff and it doesn't go on air for a week. Sometimes it's on air within a couple of hours. That's the great thing. The variety is it still excites me, because you just can't predict. I mean, I think I know what I'm doing tomorrow, but I don't know.
Thank you. And my follow-up is, what is the future for regional TV news, and what is the future for regional TV news, do you think, and what do you think affects audience figures?
Really good question, actually, and very pertinent for the time, because I've just had some information from someone, a director of news up in London for ITV, and we have licenses. I don't know if you know that we have a 10-year license to provide regional news, as I say, a public service broadcaster. So Ofcom will say, yes, BBC, ITV, you've got a job to provide regional news for the next 10 years to your audiences, wherever it is in the country. So in the next 4 years, ITV and BBC, I suspect, or at some other point, will have to justify that they have a role to fill providing regional news. And it's different for ITV because, of course, we rely on advertising revenue to a large extent for our income. So if the economy is doing poorly, as it is now because of COVID, our advertising revenue falls dramatically this year. So they're always looking at the bottom line, the budgets, and we have to make savings wherever we can, but we also have to make a news program that lasts a best part of 30 minutes every weekday night. So ITV at this very moment looking 4 years ahead to think, okay, do we want public service broadcasting in the regions? And they happily do, because the government like competition. I think they wouldn't like the BBC just to be the only provider of regional news. You might know Channel 4 has moved to Bristol not long ago. They're not yet providing regional news, but that's not to say they won't ever. Sky News as well might see it's a market, but it doesn't make money for ITV, so they are investing something like £120 million a year to finance 9 regional TV stations for ITV around the country. So you've got West Country, where we are, of course, which is Devon and Cornwall, as well as up to Gloucestershire and Wiltshire. And then you've got Meridian across on the south coast. You've got Central in Birmingham. You've got Granada in Manchester. And that's all basically ITV dipping into its own back pocket and financing it, because we don't have advertising. We have a little bit of sponsorship around football, around sport, and around weather. But it's small beer compared to what we spend, because you can imagine the costs of making TV every day with cameras and cars and people and studios. But ITV are committed to regional news because, going to your original question, because they know there is a demand for it. People still turn to regional news for their stories. They will obviously go elsewhere. They'll obviously look at their Instagram and Twitter and everything else, but they still turn to us, not as much at 6 o'clock because people have busy lives and they do other things, but we have our news online. I know the BBC have a lot of news online on the iPlayer, and ITV are a little bit behind, but they've got the ITV Hub, and people trust it, and they see themselves, and they want to hear about their region as much as they're interested in Brexit talks and anything's happening in America with the elections. They still think, yeah, but what's happening with my council tax in Bristol? Or how's my local football team doing? Or what are our politicians saying? Or what's happening with this problem down the road that I know about? And it's more than likely that we will be talking about it, or they'll hear something in their city. They might think, I never do that, or that's interesting, that happened just down the road. So I think we still got a place and a part to play, I think. Our audiences change a lot. We typically, our audiences are older because younger people tend to get their news through other forms. I ask my own children, how do you get your news? And they look online. They find a lot through social media. But they also, I do find that the older they get, they're also turning on the news on TV, and they trust that. So I think we've got a really crucial part to play, and hopefully for at least the next 10 years anyway.
So would you say that people still turn to regional news because of the scope of coverage and the reliability for around the area to cover things that not really mentioned, let's say online, or maybe, I don't know, in a newspaper, because obviously we can only cover a certain amount of things as journalists, and other means of communication, obviously regional news cover things that people don't necessarily see or hear about.
Exactly. Yeah, I think people will turn to any news outlet when they can see themselves. You know, they may not be directly involved. They may not want to be. Some people run a mile from a camera, but they can see people like them. If I did a story on a school, like I've done very recently, I came to King Alfred for A levels this summer. And obviously I've been to your school on other stories when you've been returning to the classroom after COVID. And it may not be that people are watching thinking, there's my school, there's my mate, there's me. But they will say, well, that's a school that's doing A levels, and how are they coping with GCSEs this year? And oh yeah, I can relate to that. That's just like what we've got. So I think they can see their own stories in regional news. And as you say, I think, it sounds a bit arrogant, but I think we're trusted because I think we have to be accurate and informed and balanced. So I think people can see that, even if we don't shout it. I think people would say, well, that's fair, because they did ask the council what they thought, and the council didn't want to say anything, or they give us a statement off the back of something. We're doing that a lot with hospitals at the moment. We're asking a lot of questions of hospitals about how they're coping with COVID, and they might not want to talk to us, but we always give them the opportunity to, so they can have a right of reply. And you might see these bland statements that appear on screen saying, well, the trust in response said X, and it might not be very exciting, but it's what they want to say, and we've got a duty to give that view. So I think people respect it. They don't always agree with it. They might say, why haven't they done this story, and why have they done that story? But I think if you ask them, they probably thought, well, yeah, I can see why they did do it, or I might not agree, but I sympathise with that view.
Yeah. Now I'm going to hand over to Oscar to ask his question.
Cool.
Hi, my question is, has there been any time where you feel like a story isn't going anywhere, or if you feel like something's been challenging?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's quite often the case, Oscar. Some stories you do have to maybe not give up on, but you do have to think of another way of telling them, perhaps. If people, quite often it's because people won't want to talk, because, being TV, we have to, get people, convince them to talk to us. Sometimes I've often envied newspapers, because they can talk to someone like you and me are talking now, and might just say, can I use some of this conversation? And they say, oh yeah, that's fine. And then you've got a story, and they can write it very quickly. And obviously it's in the newspaper or online often these days. And people don't quite understand how long TV can take. I was always amazed when I started in TV, how long, I was in newspapers and I was writing 12 stories a day or something. And then I went to TV and they said, well, yeah, we'll do this one story. And I couldn't believe how long it took, but it does take hours and hours. If you look at a news report, it might be a couple of minutes long, but I can imagine that would take at least a couple of hours to collect. They say it takes about an hour to collect a minute's worth of material, which sounds a bit balmy, really. And then when you put in all that work and you don't always get the result you want, you do have to talk to your editor and say, look, this story isn't true. We can't do it. It's not accurate. It's misinformed. Or how do we approach it a different way? So there are. I'm trying to think of some examples, but the Nightingale Hospital in Bristol, you may have heard of, that these hospitals that are on standby, these temporary hospitals in case the COVID cases got too big in our hospitals and they needed extra bed space. We've been trying to get access to that hospital or that centre. It's on the university campus, and the NHS have said no for many, many, many weeks now, months. I've said, can we have an interview? What's happening there? Can we have a look around? And they've just blank said, no, it's on private lands. It's not something we're prepared to let the media into at the moment. There's no one to interview and there's nothing to say. So we have to think, okay, is that fair? Do we think our audience will be saying, well, whatever happened to that Nightingale? It's costing £500,000 a month to maintain. that's my money. You know, I pay taxes. It's national health service. So do we have to try to find another way of telling that story, maybe through the unions or maybe through certain politicians who are asking questions, that sort of thing. So it's tricky, and there are some stories that are frustratingly difficult to get on. But if you believe in it and you know there's some truth in it, you just try and find another angle, or you just have to have a bit of patience and hope that it'll be worth the investment in the long run.
Finally, I'm going to hand over to Dawson.
Hi, Richard.
Hi there.
My question to you is, I know you're now working in the TV side of journalism, but what are some of the big differences between working on the digital side or the print side? And do you have a favourite platform of media?
Oh, right. Oh, great. Well, my favourite platform of media is, of course, ITV West Country News, at ITV West Country and all that sort of thing. You know, it's becoming a much bigger part of what we do. When I started at ITV, you know, there wasn't any social media platform. There wasn't an ITV News website, really. But it's becoming bigger and bigger because we obviously realised that people, as I say, no longer sit down in front of their TVs at 6 o'clock to watch the news all the time. A lot of people do still, thankfully. Regional news is still one of the most watched programmes in the country. Collectively, I think, you know, something like 4 million people a night watch ITV regional news, which is great. It's always in the top 10 of most watched programmes. But we're aware that we have to really start pulling our weight on the digital platform, because people want to watch their news very quickly on, you know, little bite-sized chunks when they're on the bus or they're you know, going to school in the car. They might just grab their phone and look at what the headlines are. I mean, I watch BBC's headlines, obviously. I look at what they do. I think they do their stuff very, very well. I like Twitter. I'm not so big on Instagram or Facebook, but I love Twitter because I use it professionally. I don't sort of post personal stuff, but I'm very interested in what other people are doing and trying to reach out to contacts or stories that you see there. But yeah, our investment in digital is getting bigger and bigger. I don't know how many of you know the Rundown. I don't know if you are aware of that, but I would recommend a look at the Rundown, which is produced ITV in London. A colleague of mine used to be in Bristol, went up to produce it, a guy called Rishi Davda. He's one of the presenters, and they give you a really quick snapshot of stories. Now, they're not regional stories, it's a national thing. So they'll be talking about the vaccine today and Brexit talks and all that sort of stuff that you might see on the national news, but that would be a half-hour programme, whereas the Rundown is, I don't know, I mean, my children will watch it, and it's, you know, it's 5 minutes less, perhaps 2 minutes of just the snappy headlines, a few little funny stories at the end, just sort of world news, just a little bit of interest. And that's something that ITV's thought of now. You know, what are we doing? How did it get online and on people's mobiles, iPads and everything? And how do we tell it to a younger audience? Because we realise that our audience, you know, most people who watch news are older people, but, you know, you guys obviously have got an interest in news. I don't know how many of your friends are mad keen news hounds as well and always watch the news, and you talk about what the news is every day at school. I don't know. I'm sure there's some, but not everyone. So we're trying to appeal to a much wider audience now, and we think, yeah, clearly digital and social media is the way of getting a hook to the next generation of viewers, I think.
It must be so interesting to delve into those different worlds of journalism. Nigel, do you have a preference? Are you more drawn towards printed news or radio?
Difficult to say, really. Having done both for quite a long time, I think my first love will always be print, because that's how I started. And you've got a bit more scope with print to not only to tell the story in more words, but you've also got sub-editors behind you and they present the stories that you write, whether they're news stories or feature articles or sports stories or whatever, and they can help to display it. And of course, it's sort of there forever, if you like. You know, it's these days you can go onto the websites of most newspapers, and you can go back days, months, and years and find the stories that people have written all those years ago. Whereas with radio and TV, it's a little bit more ephemeral. But the reason that I left print to go into radio was that TV and radio are much more immediate. If something goes bang, as sadly it did in Avonmouth last week, then you can be reporting from the scene and you can get that story on air in a matter of minutes. Whereas with a newspaper, although the newspaper's got its social media website, you can kind of break stories that way. As far as the traditional newspapers are concerned, it takes a lot longer. So the Bristol Evening Post is the largest player around here when it comes to newspapers. And they wouldn't have been able to get that story into their newspaper until the following day. Whereas, you know, everybody else would have had that story, TV, radio, nationally and locally, within minutes and certainly within hours. So it's a bit of both, really. So both of them have their benefits. But I think because I grew up in newspapers, then I'll plump for newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
Megan has some final questions for you now.
Sure.
Hi, Richard. I have a couple of questions for you. So my first one is, what is the most rewarding part of your job?
Oh, meeting people. Yeah, just simply having the freedom to go out and find stories and talk to people and hear and just get a little bit, it's just a little bit of a window on their world, you know, if it's only just for a few minutes, and it might only be one aspect of their life. It's just a chance to hear what they've got to say, and just to, you know, I'm sure Nigel and everyone has told you before that everyone's got a story. You know, it doesn't matter where they're from, their age, their gender, what their interests are. If you talk to them long enough, you'll find a story in them. And I think that's the great reward, is finding the story within that person and telling the world about it, really.
Okay. My second question is, did you always want to be on TV?
No. It's a very quick answer. No. If you told me that many years ago, I wouldn't have believed you, because no, I'm not a natural performer in front of the camera. I was very happy in newspapers, behind the pages, and then you know, I fancied a change, and I went freelance and did a few things on websites and writing for different companies, sort of internal magazines, which wasn't as rewarding because it was just all kind of promotional, sort of biased sort of stuff that wasn't of great interest, and it was just internal. And then I was managed to get some work as a freelance at ITV. And that was just as a researcher, and they don't have researchers anymore, but they did then. And then I started producing some little bulletins. We used to have bulletins in the middle of the morning, and then the lunchtime, and in the middle of the afternoon. So, and early mornings and late evenings. And I started producing those, and then I slowly started reporting. And then, you know, the necessity arises that you have to put yourself on front of camera. But it wasn't something that I was desperate to do. I didn't think, you know, from an early age, I just got to be on telly. It was the journalism that just led me to ending up there, really. But I wouldn't have thought I would have done it when I was your age. But you never know what the future holds.
I'll pass over to Sasha to ask you a question now.
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Hi, Sasha.
Is there anyone who inspired you to become a journalist?
Oh, that's a good question. Not at the outset. I mean, I don't come from a family of journalists, or meet anyone who I thought, wow, you've got the best job in the world and I need to be where you are. So to step into journalism was just sort of off my own back. You know, you have to be very lucky. I'm sure that's as true today as any, by getting the break. And I had an editor who had faith that I might be able to do some good or be of some use at some point. So he gave me the job. And then I met journalists who I admired within the newspaper. And then when I went to the Bristol Evening Post, there were very good journalists there. I mean, I was in my early 20s when I went there, and I didn't know, which way was up or anything like that. And it was, quite scary to move and to be on a daily newspaper, which was, quite fast and immediate. And I remember many times, incurring the wrath of the sports editor when I didn't know something or didn't do something quickly enough or correctly in his eyes. There was one journalist there who'd been there a few years, and he sort of took me under his wing a bit and just guided me, how to write, what way to put things, what would work, what wouldn't work, introduced me to the right contacts, because as I say, we were in sport. And I went down just to Bristol City and met managers, and he was the reporter and I was just shadowing him. And he was a great support, absolutely great, and would always sort of give me advice and tell me when things were good and when they were bad. And it was a tough few years, and I can't say I enjoyed it really. I knew it had a means to an end, and it would be worth it. But it was tough. I hope now that people are a bit nicer to each other a little bit. It was a bit cutthroat. Well, I thought at the time. I don't now, and it toughened me up and gave me a thick skin. But I think nowadays, from my TV's experience, certainly people are more supportive and more generous, and I think people are just kinder to each other a bit more now. I think in the 80s and 90s, it was a bit old school and a bit hard. But I think now, although it's, as I said before, it's just as competitive, I think hopefully people are a bit nicer and really want to see you guys do well and really want you to be a success. Because if you're happy and you're doing what you enjoy and you like the people you're with, it's absolutely going to produce the best from you. If you're thinking every day going into work or going into whatever job you want to do, it's like going into school. If you think, oh no, double maths today, I hate the teacher and they don't like me, then you're not going to perform your best. But if people are nice to you and you like the subject and you enjoy what you do, I think you're going to perform so much better. And I think that's true in the world of work as much as it is in education.
Thank you to everyone for joining us today.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much for giving your time today. It's been great to see you.
You're welcome. No, good to see you all. No, well done. Keep doing what you're doing. It's fantastic. Take care.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everyone, well done.